Well, thank you all for hanging in there. I know it's been a long couple of days and especially long nights. So just real quickly, I wanted to start just with a same slide. Oops, if I put them in the wrong order. Start with the same slide that I showed on the regulatory presentation, in the sense that there is no silver bullet. It's not just about hydro and just about thermal or just about transmission or just about anything. But we do say, while there's no silver bullet, there's a lot of silver buckshot, okay? There's a lot of things out there that are going to happen and get done in this process to be able to help this mature inside of India and what goes on. But I think something that the last panel said, that Harry said actually, was it's really important to consider timing here. Because you know that hydro projects are going to take years, if not decades. And you know, in the event of nuclear, it would obviously take a very long time. And large-scale thermal and fuel issues and all of those things are on different scales. And so different technologies and different solutions have the ability to deal with things in different time periods. And it's important in the evolution of a smart grid roadmap to think about those things that can be done quickly, in the 0 to 3 to 5 year range, in the 5 to 10 year range, in the 10 to 15 year range, and what goes with that. So part of what goes on for why we formed Innovari and what we did post living inside of a utility for 15 years and then getting to work on Capitol Hill in the United States for the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and following that saying, what is happening around the industry and around the world, and what are we going to do to change that with this company? And the big thing that became very, very apparent is there are a lot of people out there doing great generation technologies, things with wonderful turbines that, you know, are blowing air across the blades from the center of the shaft so you can increase the temperatures on the input. Crazy great technologies, turbines, hydro, all of these things are going on all the way to the substation. The one area that utilities really felt that nobody had brought a solution or a technology or a platform for to them was, how are we managing the distribution grid with all these technologies at the edge? And it became very important that we figured out a way to engage the demand side in this equation. So historically around the world, people have done demand response or demand side management in a variety of ways and had lots of lessons learned. Manual measures demand response. This is somebody with a pager, with a text, an email, a phone bank, calling people and saying, hey, today at 2 o'clock, put on your sneakers, run around and turn stuff off. Sneaker net, right? So let's go around, run around, turn everything off. So that's great. There's a role for that kind of demand response, but ultimately the grid operator can't see it. They don't know if it actually happened until 30 days later when they settle on the basis of the meter reading. So from a reliability standpoint, it's an invisible product. California has spent just north, California alone, the state, over the last 15 years, has spent a little over $1.5 billion doing demand response programs to create over 4,000 megawatts of demand that the independent system operator of California can use exactly how much in their forward forecast? Zero. Not dispatchable, not two-way verifiable, can't see it, can't use it, okay? Billions of dollars later. And oh, by the way, that program was dispatched 11 hours last year, 11 hours. So then you go to direct load control, things like one-way AC load cycling, where you send a paging signal out. Great example, Austin Energy, they put in 140,000 thermostats 4 years ago. The consumers have taken them off of their walls and reinstalled their old thermostat. There's less than 40,000 left. Austin Energy's paying 140,000 rebates. All the thermostats are gone, and they're going to abandon the program after they spent $60 million to put it in. So what became very apparent, this has to be verified load management. It has to be two-way. That's what has to happen. But regardless of what you heard, less than 5% of all of the demand response in the United States is two-way verifiable. Very, very little of it is this type of technology. And even more importantly, you've all heard Lawrence Berkeley Labs, Lawrence Livermore, Oak Ridge National Labs, all these different people. Lawrence Berkeley National Labs has done a great job with a platform called OpenADR. And they've been able to take all these technologies and move them up the chain to say, hey, we all have to respond to the same signal. We all have to be able to do these different things. But ultimately, There's not a single company outside of ours in the world that we're aware of today that actually transacts with the control center. Well, why is that? Well, outside of things like government secret service, the power control room is the most secure environment in the world. We don't let people touch our control rooms. But our company is filled with people who have built utility control rooms. And so we created a technology and a thought process that said it's got to be two-way verifiable, closed loop control. It has to be dispatchable by the utility. They have to see in real time that they achieved what they asked for. And not only that, it needs to be surgical. While you can call for 100 megawatts, you also need to be able to call for one building on one feeder if that's all that you need for help that day. You don't want to dispatch a program at 100 megawatts when you only need 500 kilowatts on one feeder. So you had to have a broad range of technologies and capabilities to do this, and this is the evolution of what's happened in the industry and what's gone on there. Lots of lessons learned, lots of things to think about, lots of history. And I will tell you that largely, if you were to look at it today with today's technology, and you were to look at it with that lens, very much like India is looking backwards a lot and looking at the history and the problems that exist, there's got to be a time and place where you stop and look forward and say, okay, here's where we're at, we're going to deal with that, but we're going to move forward from here, okay? Very much like the history in the United States. A lot of people will tell you that demand response is incredibly successful, that California is incredibly successful. But if I want to look at it through the eyes of saying, I spent over $1 billion and I get 11 hours of dispatch every year and I can't count it in my forward forecast portfolio, I would call that a failure. Well, the lessons learned and all the things that we've done are great lessons learned and they've been very good, but what it's taught us is technology has changed, the times have changed, and we need to do things a little bit differently now if we're going to attack this side of the question. But the first real point is, what are you going to do with it? Okay? And when I talk about timelines and what the goals are and the things that are pertinent to India, things that are pertinent in the United States with a country that enjoys 12 to 20% reserve margins of overcapacity, no rolling blackouts anyway, a fully electrified nation, are not the same issues that are here. And so when an American comes in and says, I've got the solution to fix your problem, perhaps they should listen to what your problem is first, okay? And I think that a lot of the things that are going on are people are proposing solutions to problems that exist in Europe and America that do not exist here. There are things that need to happen here first to make sure that you can increase adequacy of supply before you worry about some of the more minutia details that we tend to worry about in the United States. And the biggest one is the low duration curve. Everybody, I think, in the room has talked about this, the very few hours a year of peak and the problems that it creates. But ultimately, the metrics around the demand side have to say we're going to affect this curve. And 11 hours a year doesn't solve it. The programs that have to be created here have to be able to look at a goal of taking off those peaks and filling up the valley at the bottom. And if you can flatten that low duration curve, just what I did there for one country, this is over $6 billion of infrastructure that do not need to be built right there. And we've already proven this can be done. Billions of dollars of infrastructure don't need to be built if you can get some two-way verifiable load control of the demand side. So the idea, though, is how does this happen? And I'll go back to a theme that we talked about in the regulatory piece. Electricity is the one thing, and investing in the people that touch the consumer, the grid, has to be a viable thing to do. You cannot have an entire industry where the wires companies are on the edge of bankruptcy because the thought process of 1 crow or 2 crows per unit is unbearable to the population. 24/7 reliability, grid security and reliability are what allow a nation to prosper. Yes, roads are important. Yes, all these other things are important. But electricity is the only thing in the history of mankind that ties to the health and welfare of an entire nation. So an asset-based approach is the way that this is going to work inside of the framework of regulatory economics. If you tell a utility it's a good idea to pay somebody not to use their product, you are going to get the demand response structure that exists in America that has been spent billions and billions of dollars and operated less than 11 hours a year. If you create an incentive system and a structure by which you create a partnership and you allow the engagement of the consumer by the utility. If a consumer has a 1500 kilowatt generator, the answer is not to separate that customer from the grid in times of peak and have them run their generator and run their load, because their load's only 600 kilowatts. You want the other 900 kilowatts that generator can produce, producing it for the grid so that you can keep grid security and reliability and stability in place and intact. But you cannot do that if you do not allow the utility, the distribution utilities, to invest in a platform that allows this. And it's crucial that that policy gets corrected. So overall, in terms of a platform and a thought process, what we have been able to do in conjunction with working with regulators and utilities around the world, we've been able to create a platform that allows the utility, instead of seeing all of this as a threat, a customer getting a generator, a customer getting a photovoltaic panel, any type of photovoltaic or small scale wind or anything else, it creates a platform by which now they can interact with it positively to grid through a business model and a capability to grid that works for everybody involved in the transaction. And this platform is crucial because on a building like this, if they had a generator and if they had a photovoltaic panel, you can manage the intermittency of the photovoltaics with this building load. You do not have to ask the grid to manage that intermittency. You can do it with an intelligent system. And it's crucial as we roll forward with more and more of intermittency and renewables that we allow things like this to occur. And then just wrap up, the important piece of this isn't about the separation or breaking things apart. It's about collaborating and working together. And it's crucial that the regulator, the utility, and the consumer come back together and not fragment apart in this conversation, because customers are investing in demand-side generation and technologies and reliability and things to keep them whole. And those things can be an important part for India's future in the next 5 to 10 years, while the rest of the policy for huge infrastructure and hydro and thermal and nuclear, all those things are being worked out and the base loads created. In the next 5 years, India has the capability of getting 20 to 30,000 megawatts of dynamic demand response fully enabled in a 5-year period that can help manage the grid in a very short amount of time. Thank you all very much.